Hi everyone, welcome to UMA Saco, and we have our guests with us, Mike Perry, Lieutenant Perry. You're gonna have to wave or make some noise.
Oh, hello. Lieutenant Perry from the New York County Sheriff's Office. The training director. I've been over at that facility for 22 years. I wouldn't say 23. It's a little closer, but yeah.
And then can we introduce the person beside you?
So hi, my name is Jennifer Elwell, and I am with the York County Government with the talent acquisition, recruiting, and I also handle our wellness and safety programs for the county.
So we want to welcome everyone to the Zoom. I guess the camera's gonna stare at you two for a bit. And welcome everyone who is participating on our Zoom and listening to the recording of this presentation by Lieutenant Mike Perry. And this is Cup of Joe with a CO. It's all yours, Lieutenant.
Thank you. Awesome. So again, thank you for everybody for joining us today for a cup of Joe with a CO. Really, this is just an open and honest conversation about understanding the field of corrections straight from a CO. All right, so I thought we would kind of start off this session with a little bit of a history lesson. So corrections has a long and evolving history that really reflects the changes in societal attitudes towards crime and punishment. All right, so the early origins of corrections really can be traced back to the colonial times. Punishment back then was really primarily corporal and public. This would involve flogging, maiming, and public shaming. They used imprisonment as a form of punishment, and that started to begin taking shape around the American Revolution. So really, there's been a huge progression over time that's kind of led us to our modern correctional system that we have now. So really, the Wall Street Jail in Philadelphia, that was really the first state prison that we saw in 1790. So I mean, this goes back a long time. New York in 1816, that's when the Auburn system was created. And that focused more on having cohesion during the day, but in silence, and then isolation at night. That is really what started to lay the groundwork for modern corrections, because they wanted to start focusing more on really rehabilitation versus just punishment. And then in Pennsylvania, the Eastern State Penitentiary, 1829, that then they started to shift even more towards more solitary confinement with the hope or goal of trying to encourage reform and penance.
I would think too, during this time, it's usually 1773 to 1829, you're gonna start seeing, obviously, the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, come into play. So a lot of those things and how, or just decisions or conversations about how that relates to people and incarceration during that period of time. So Walnut Street Jail, even I always talk about when I bring some folks through corrections facilities, if you ever take a trip down to Salem, Mass, to the dungeon, the Salem dungeon, below the courthouse, well, that whole play on the courthouse upstairs, they talk about size of jail cells were determined by how much money or wealth your family had. So if you were a very wealthy family, you could fit about 20 people in your family in this room. If you were less fortunate, you could fit the same 20 people in probably the space that is in between these desks. So once the Constitution of the United States was ratified, the Bill of Rights had to really start considering what these rights meant to all Americans, not just those that were.
The more modern correction, so the 20th century, early 1900s, this is when we started to see the federal prison system in the United States established. As he was saying, you know, things really started to take a turn. This led to more construction of facilities like USP Leavenworth and USP Atlanta. Again, the focus started shifting more towards rehabilitation, education, and vocational training for inmates who we now refer to as residents. Late 20th century, this is when you saw that rise of tough on crime. This led to more incarcerations, the rate increased. That then led to more constructions of prisons. But we then saw the development of community-based correction programs, again, probation, parole, really in the hopes to reducing relapse into criminal behavior.
There's it was the New Mexico prison riots in the 1970s, late 1970s, 80s, when the tough on crime laws, I think it was like the Reagan era, and the over incarceration of folks for drug crimes. They were seeing an influx of prisoners in prisons that weren't intended to hold as many people that were coming into jails, prisons. So that you can find that video on YouTube. It's the New Mexico penitentiary prison riot, whatever. But and they were doing construction, so they were building bigger prisons at the time as well. But there's one of the things that there's one point that there's an officer talking about how there were 12 prison officers for a population of 1,200 male, minimum, medium, and maximum security. And it was crazy. They were so overcrowded that they were afraid to do even head counts in facilities because they knew if they were to step on somebody on the floor, there would be fights, people would be getting assaulted. So yeah, that tough on crime era, the things that were happening because of overcrowding has now led to where we are now, like a little bit more conscious about what we're doing and how we're treating people when they're incarcerated.
Well, you have the terms up on the screen. Could you explain the difference between probation and parole?
So probation and parole, the state of Maine does not have a parole system, but probation and parole kind of are similar, but in our probation systems is supervised release from a sentence of incarceration. So you'll often hear the terms, especially on when court sentences are handed down, they'll say sentenced to 10 years, all but 5 to be served with a period of 5 years probation. So that's a supervised release. Those folks are basically in community corrections where they are able to be free outside of the facilities, but they have to check in with probation, who are still, they're part of the Department of Corrections. So yeah. We even have now too in the jail systems, we have the main pretrial service. That's it's pretrial probation. In a sense, where these people are out on bail, but they're still on supervised release to make sure that they're not committing crimes while out on bail.
Thanks.
All right, so contemporary trends. So the 21st century, today there is a growing emphasis on restorative justice, more focus on mental health treatment, which as we all know is so important today, and alternatives to incarceration. The field continues to evolve, kind of some of the stuff that you've been touching on, with ongoing debates about the best approaches to punishment and rehabilitation. Corrections is a dynamic field, always adapting, always new challenges, that have to go along with societal changes. And so, it's a different story every day.
Yeah, to go along with that as well, a few years ago we saw the change in how we've heard the term like administrative segregation or putting people in the hole for long periods of time in solitary confinement. There was a lot of studies being done about how damaging that actually is to a human being. And we shouldn't have expectations that that's going to help anybody when you're isolating them and sensory deprivation environment. In the prison system, sometimes years, and county facilities, there were people in there 30 plus days. And so I have seen it in my career, and so I am grateful for this change, but I've seen where someone was placed in segregation, that had behavioral, mental health issues that just devolve while sitting in solitary and isolation. It's not helpful. So that's one of the things, like how do we keep people out of those super kind of punishing environments and try to rehabilitate, make them well if we could.
That actually was one of my questions is isolation or solitary something that happens at the county level in the facility, the jail facility?
So it's not solitary, like you look back in that New Mexico prison, right, you'll see that, and if you, I took a trip to Alcatraz because I'm a CO, so why not, right? Let's take a trip to a prison. But those deprivation cells, there were no beds, there was a hole in the floor, the doors closed, and there was no lights, there was no contact in those cells at all. So imagine sitting in a dark environment, in a hole, and you felt like they were saying in that video that you were swallowed by the belly of the beast.
Right.
That would drive even the most sane person
Right.
mad, right? But we don't have solitary. We do have segregated housing, only for those folks that present the threat to not only themselves but
Or
to
to
others. And in our units, in our segregation units, we do have care worker, caseworkers, or mental health providers in speaking to population. And plus, we're in units with those folks as well. So we are constantly monitoring and having conversations. And so they're stuck in a room for a long periods of time, but they're not left alone. It's not solitary where we're monitoring, we're making sure that their health and mental health needs are being met.
So I come from an education background and I instantly think of giving one of the students like a timeout. So you need a timeout, you need a break, go take a break, or sending them to the office for just a time, literally a timeout, take a walk, find a new headspace and come back. But
We have, and the housing units and the day rooms, we will have those types of timeouts where it's a short period of time and it's not like moved away from general population, but we just have to remind people that we have rules and regulations and policies and procedures in place to make sure that you don't get hurt and that nobody else in our facilities gets hurt or have, because crimes can be committed inside of jails and prisons. And as corrections officers, we need to make sure that things like assaults or thefts or, abuse or just mistreatment of others is not happening on a daily basis.
so I have another question. So I'm literally sitting here writing out my questions as you're talking. So you said there were units, plural. How many people, and like, you don't have to quote me like today we have however many, but in general, how many residents would there be in a jail and how many officers would be there working with them? Like you said in New Mexico, at
Right.
that riot time, it was something like 1,200 resident
To
inmates
12, yeah.
to 12 persons. So what's a safer number?
Right now, like we have, and our facility is not the largest in the state. It's it's probably Somerset and Cumberland are larger than us. So it would obviously depend on that size and in relation to the communities. But for us, with our 7 units, 6 being open, population 200 and about 14 to 20 officers on a shift. And supervisory and administrative staff during the day, so. But if we're in a housing unit, one of our largest housing units, which is B3, it's minimum medium security residents, so that's like minimum being the least secure, like the least threat, medium threat. Population 76, we would put 1 officer to 64. If we went 65 and above, we put an additional staff member in there just for safety and security and observation.
And again, I'm going back to like my education background and I'm thinking 65 kids in the lunchroom and 1 teacher? No, would never happen.
Right, so in that 65, 64.
64, right, because the minute we go
That
65, we
one,
need 2.
that one makes a difference, but you just need to be able to manage, like you can't bend, you have to make sure that you're following all the rules, you have to absolutely never show favoritism, and just, be consistent every single day, and you can manage that population.
All right, now I have a different question. But I don't know if you need to go forward with your
No,
slides.
we're fine. Are you good?
I'm good, you're good.
So, okay, so be consistent, be upstanding, I forget all the words you said, but you said consistent and make sure. So, one of our instructors here at UMA is Randy Liberty. And he teaches 2 classes off the top of my head. He teaches restorative justice and he teaches mental health and corrections. And I took his mental health course and he talks a lot about the main model. So how does, don't play favorites, that's the other thing you said.
Yeah.
So how does don't play favorites, the main model of treating people as residents versus you're an inmate, you're incarcerated, you're guilty, that idea, so how do you walk that line at the
boundaries.
jail?
So, and that, what you're thinking in Mr. Liberty?
Yeah.
Fair, firm, and consistent is what,
Fair,
that's our
firm,
mantra,
consistent.
care, custody, and control is what we do on a daily basis, that's our job, so. As far as favoritism, we don't see people in terms of their custody, we treat everybody exactly the same, so it would be more for us, corrections, like equality over equity, like we're not concerning ourselves with individual needs, we will, I mean, but that would be taken care of by medical, mental health, but our jobs inside of that unit facility is to make sure that every single person in there, including other corrections officers, is treated the same, and that's fair, firm, and consistently on a daily basis.
Thank you. All right, explain.
So we're gonna go ahead and dive into the role of the correctional officer. And this is where I'm gonna let Lieutenant Perry take over.
And we've talked about this a little bit, the role of a corrections officer to enforce rules and keep order. Supervise the activity of residents, search for contraband items, inspect facilities to ensure that they meet correctional standards. And that would be that they're clean, that there's enough, access to hygiene items and making sure that they're safe so that, there's no fire hazards or things that residents can cut themselves on or, our staff as well. Report on residents' conduct. We need to make sure that we're reporting everything. We need to make sure we're logging every single thing that happens in that facility because it's a historical record. We need to make sure that, if we're audited or if something happens that we can show in a report or by action that, the facility is taking its best steps to keep people safe. Aid in rehabilitation and counseling of offenders. And we're human beings too, when we're in that facility. But we do have boundaries, so we can show empathy and kindness. But we gotta be careful as corrections staff to not become too personal, not to become too over familiar. It's more about them and how we can best serve those folks that find themselves inside of our corrections facility at that time.
So what we've included is a really great video that I found from our friends in New Zealand. As far as about corrections, because we're in the process of making our own video, it's kind of top secret right now. So we'll go ahead and have you play the video, and it's just talking more about the role of the correctional officer. So now that Lieutenant Perry has had his cup of joe, well, we're gonna go ahead and see him in action at the Maine Department of Corrections as they go over basic correction training. And so this will give a little bit more perspective as far as what we do here in Maine. All right, so now that we've spilled the beans on the field of corrections, it's time for my friend here, Lieutenant Perry, to go ahead and clean up by answering any questions that you may have about corrections.
So I have a question for you based on the video that you just shared. 5.5 weeks of training,
5.5 weeks of training, so.
but that's different from, so go ahead,
So different from what?
from, I thought, what police officers on the street have to do.
There's a
which I don't
lot,
know,
I mean,
maybe.
you're talking about with the difference between corrections a little bit and law enforcement is the lethals that they carry, that responsibility of having their firearms, the lethal munitions that they carry in their vehicles, so obviously EVOC classes and
Right, so
and
different.
patrolling, it's a little bit different. Corrections could, I mean, it's a similar job. We're patrol officers inside of a corrections facility. More patrol officers are patrolling the streets, so we have a lot more control. We have walls, right?
Right, so-
We know
So
where
if they
our,
run, you can.
we know where our potential threats are constantly.
Right,
But if you're,
always.
if you're, you know, out in the patrol officer out in a community that is super like rural in most parts, Maine are.
Yeah,
Think about how dangerous that is when you realize that your backup is miles away.
Right,
So
yeah.
I mean, it's similar, it's both high stress, but there's the patrol, those folks in police services are 18 weeks, and state police and wardens go a little bit longer than that. We do 5.5 weeks when I first started. So if you watch that video, that I recommend that New Mexico's prison riots, if you want to look
I got
at
it
the
on my
historical
list.
context. The gentleman in the video was talking about, and this goes well when I teach an assault, riots and disturbance class at the academy. And I use that as an icebreaker. And there's a gentleman that's talking about his experiences working corrections. He said when he walked into that facility on day one, they gave him a set of keys and told him where to go on post. And that's it. That's the amount of training that you got to work in a facility that housed over 1,200 like very dangerous people. When I started in 2002, we were at it was a linear style of supervision, which is different than direct supervision today, where we're in housing units with population. But we were given a week of in classroom training, week of job shadow, week of in classroom training. Then we were assigned a shift given. We just found our way and figured out how to work amongst populations of people. And it's hard when you're first on job, because how many people have ever actually willingly put themselves into prisons and jails? Not many, right? So trying to figure out that entire culture when you've never been in it before, and now you are there by yourself amongst
And,
potential threats.
right, and you're in charge.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we do a really good job of support. I mean, Lieutenant Perry is training.
Right,
So he is there to support all of the onboarding staff, no matter what they need, he's there to give them the support. They have field training officers, that again, another line of support.
Right.
So it's really about making sure that your team feels supported and they have the training that they need and it's available to them when they need it.
so is it almost like ongoing training that
Absolutely.
happens? So you do your 5.5 weeks at the academy.
The five and
Or-
yeah, so
so
it's
you-
over
so you-
220 hours that it's
Okay,
mandated
right.
by the Criminal Justice Academy in classroom. But we can do as much field training as we deem necessary to make sure that that person feels safe and can provide the safety and security to others that we require as a corrections facility.
Alright, so now I'm gonna back you up a couple of steps. Is the process something like, I wanna be a corrections officer, you're hiring at York County Jail?
Right.
So, and do you hire me and then send me to the academy? Or do I go to the academy and then you go, oh, that, I like that one, we're gonna take her?
No, so we have quite an extensive screening process. We'll bring you and have a conversation with you and then bring you through a tour, the facility, just to make sure that, is this the place that you think that you'd be able to work in? That's important, right? And then, there's other screenings of backgrounds, we'll have interviews
Preferences.
and whatnot.
Right.
And so
Kind
once
of
we,
board.
once
Right.
we've decided as a group, that you would make a potentially good officer candidate, we'll bring you on board. If there's time prior to the academy, we'll have like a shadow an orientation period where those folks are just observers in units with FTOs in units. So they're in with amongst population, amongst the residents, but they're not really in an active role. Just want them just to learn
Acclimate
and
to
pay
the
attention
environment.
and
Right, right.
acclimate. So it gives them a good opportunity, it gives those folks that are coming in a good opportunity to understand what corrections is prior to going to the academy for those 5 weeks. So when they get in the classroom, they've already had some of that hands-on learning, so that they can understand the concepts that much better.
So then, up to the academy for the time period, the 220 some odd hours, and then they come back to you. And then if they said, Lieutenant, I have a need, I feel that I need to learn more about this,
Right.
there is training.
Well, it's
Provided, or-
this mandated, but at least 80 hours or more field training post academy that we'll do. In the past, we would hire and send people right to the academy. But if we have time now, like depending on when the academy, next is January, if we were to hire you tomorrow, we'd have an opportunity to have you just kind of observe.
Observation.
And so you would have a better understanding going to the academy, but when you come back from the academy, now we're gonna say, okay, we wanna see how you, at first, like, it would be like an 80-20 split between yourself and an FTO. Second week, more like 50-50, and then that third week is dress rehearsal, where we wanna see that you can apply all of the knowledge and all the skills that you've learned over, definitely over 5 weeks, but then the 3 weeks of FTO, but it could have been like, the
Right.
2 months you spent observing.
Right,
Let's see where you are. Do you feel comfortable? Are you able to do this job? And even if at the end of 3, like Lieutenant Perry, I just need another week of refinement. I'm getting or grasping some of the concepts. Can I do another week of field training? Absolutely. We want to see you succeed. It's
Right.
important that you're a successful member of the team. We're not trying to fill numbers. We want teammates. We want people to help.
so then I have a different question, because it was something you said. You said that officers in a police officer gets different training, so they have to do different training at the academy. Do you as a CEO carry a gun when you're in the facilities population? Did I even say that correct?
Yes, but
Okay.
no, we would never carry lethals. We wouldn't want it taken away from us. If you're one, and then there's, like I said, there's a potential for
64.
76, depending on what your population looks like, is in our facility, these
Right.
facilities that it's 1 to a couple hundred to
Right.
whatever, and then the bigger
Right.
facilities in the state. So and it was on that first video that we watched where it took place in
New Zealand?
New Zealand.
Yeah,
The female corrections officer, the woman was saying that your biggest your skill is the ability to speak.
to communicate, right, yeah.
Start with communication. Communication's like 9 times out of 10, you can help resolve those issues if you pay attention to them and be an active listener and listen to what people say. And if you don't know the answer to something or how to help them solve it, like, don't pretend that you do. Just be honest and say, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll find somebody that does and try to help you out. I did have a situation where there was a resident, he was an intake, and he was somebody that I had built rapport with over the years. So like we had the mutual understanding and respect between corrections staff and population. And I was down an intake, I think it was an overtime shift, and it was 4:30 in the afternoon, and so that's when we bring down meal service. We serve supper at like 4:30 to all population. And as I'm walking down to my post, I just witnessed him like throw his entire plastic tray as hard as he could against the wall. And so that was the first 10 minutes or so that I was on shift, and I was like, take a breath and like, okay, let's go figure out what this is. And so went to the door and had a conversation, and he was withdrawing. He was, withdrawing from substance use or whatever it was. And it was a larger cell. He was really, really cold. He was just shaking, just sick. And there was like, a bucket, for him to, because he got sick into. So that was in the room. So it's just a lot of things just aggravating him. So I said, well, that was not the appropriate way to deal with that. And if you would voluntarily comply to clean that up, then let's see what I can do. And so it worked out. I went in, and obviously I gave him a bio bag to take care of the thing that I thought may be thrown at me first and foremost. I got that out of my way. And then he and I ended up cleaning the cell together, and we're just having a conversation about what was going on with him. And like I said, I built rapport. That's something you have to build towards, those types of relationships inside of those facilities. But by the end of that conversation, he had like completely de-escalated. I brought him into a smaller cell and it was a little bit warmer in there and he just went to sleep. He slept there the entire shift, so. Like, if I had gone down there and reacted inappropriately and addressed it with more force, it would have just been a bad situation all night long. But if you just take some time and just have conversations with people and try to help them help themselves, it usually goes 100% better.
I like how you're like being politically correct, whereas I would have said, I would have just made sure that the bucket of vomit was removed first, so
Right,
that
well,
wasn't
I was
gonna-
trying to be sensitive.
Right, be sensitive,
Well, I
sorry.
knew that if I aggravated him, I would, there was like
Right,
a good chance
right,
that I'd be
that-
wearing that, and
yeah,
I didn't want to do
No,
that.
no, that would not be high on the list.
Right, so, and that's just some of the things you learn about that, like, I was a line cook, I started cooking in kitchens and working in kitchens at 14, I went to the Navy for a little while, but then came back and was just doing that. Line cook thing, and then around 27, 28, I met a woman that said you need a career, like you need to have a retirement. So I said, corrections right up the road, never thought of ever doing that in my life. Had no idea like how to really communicate effectively and manage populations of people. But there's just been like some times in my career that I can remember. I think it was that 1 year, like you make it 1 year, you know the job, like not the job, but you know like the basic functions of the job. 5 years, it was weird. It was like literally there was a moment in time where I realized that I had built rapport and I had respect from population, and the respect meaning that they feel confident that you're not going to overly punish, like it's fair, firm, consistent, and they're familiar with how you're going to run your housing units. And then now it's just, if I walk in a housing unit, it's like, I'm just that old guy that's just become a fixture over time, right? You know, I'm just there, like, you know, and and it's kind of, in a weird way, it's like, you know, you get to know, like I've known a lot of those people for a very long time. So, I don't know, it's weird to say that it becomes almost like a family in there. You spend 20 years, 20+ years of your life in some place. It becomes a part of you, honestly.
For sure.
Yeah.
So, different question, and I'm just gonna show my ignorance again. If someone, cause you said you've known people, but I thought jail, you couldn't stay for a long time, but you can come back.
You can come back.
You can come back, okay.
Yeah, and so that was the recidivism piece. So, and it's just people, and instead of like pointing it back, you know, you don't point it out to them like, oh, like what, you know.
No, here we
like,
go
hey,
again.
I always open up with, hey, how are you? How's things? How are you doing? We just have a conversation, and they're not doing that well when they come in, obviously. So I'm not gonna point it out to them. There's no need to do that. I'm not,
They already know.
They know.
they know, and we're not there, like they said in the video too, we're not there to judge people, we're there to make sure that they're safe, to make sure that they don't harm themselves, they don't, you know, harm other people, or. So it's just, like I said, it's just, I think at the end of the day, like what we're trying to do is role model the best expectations of society, right? This is how we're supposed to act towards one another. Right, so maybe, I don't know if that's the message, like, if a CO and a resident can get along, like, it's possible to get along with most of
With anybody, right? Sure, that makes sense.
two polar opposites.
That makes sense.
I always thought too, one other story I love to tell, especially to new staff. In law enforcement, in public service, you're gonna end up working holidays, you're gonna end up working Christmas, like, and who wants to work Christmas, especially when you have young kids, so. I remember, I think my son was very, very little, when your children are starting to realize what Christmas are, that's how old he was, so about 3-4 years old, where you can see the excitement on the face, right? But I had to work a shift that day. And we were in a housing unit, and I was in with another corrections officer. It was a smaller population, it was 40, but I was in there because we had a resident that was having some mental health challenges and was trying to self-harm. So I was just in there to pay more attention to that person and help the other officer, because he had 41 other people he had to manage as well. And it was Christmas morning. And so I was kind of like, you know, bummed out when I went to work, and Catholic Charities sends in bags of like gifts, so it would be like socks or toothpaste or maybe like a
Right.
candy bar. So I remember that morning I was walking around and as I was opening the cell doors, I was just jingling my keys, so it sounded a little like sleigh bells.
Oh, very nice.
And at first I wasn't really thinking about what I was doing, and it really got to me, like, I opened one door and handed the gift and a resident said, thank you. Like, honestly, thank you.
Thank you.
And I was like, wow, like I was feeling so bad. But now I feel worse for the way I felt coming in here because there are always people that have it. Not worse than you,
Right.
but one of our Christmas traditions at home and maybe in everybody's household, I would hope, is to watch a Christmas Story on like loop all day long. There were 2 TVs in the housing units, and both of those TVs were on a Christmas Story all day long. Everybody got along. It was like the most perfect day in corrections. And I think it's thinking back on it, it was because of the way I came in and approached the situation. I could have been just a jerk coming in because I had to work Christmas, but what would that have helped? That wouldn't help anybody. Probably I had a rotten day, but I would say it was probably the best day I've ever had as a corrections officer, honestly. Just everybody was just super helpful to one another. It was a Christmas miracle.
Christmas miracle. Awesome. All right, so then, are there any last thoughts from either of you to end?
No, I just, corrections is a great career. It's super challenging, like any public service position is, honestly. And you just have to come into service, as a human. Like you bring bits and parts of yourself. We're not robotic machines. We're gonna have good days, bad days, but at the end of the day, we have to control ourselves and our emotions. Because if we can't do that, we're gonna have a very hard time controlling population. So I think it's a challenge. It's rewarding at the same time.
Absolutely, and you guys make a difference every day. So a lot of people forget that not everybody comes in the best conditions, and you don't know, that's where the empathy, like you've talked about, is you don't know what somebody's history is, you don't know what kind of childhood they had, and so to take a step back and go, wow, this person nobody may have ever been nice to this person, but I can change that today. And so I think, I think, again, corrections is one of those fields that isn't always looked at and rewarded for the hard work and dedication and the changes they do make for society.
And I always say too, corrections is probably that only job that, if we do our jobs really, really, really well, we'll work ourselves out of the job because, we'll have fixed society, rehabilitated everybody. I'm not sure if that'll ever happen in my lifetime, but that's the goal. and I
That
just
is a
think
great goal.
Thank you again for allowing
Thank
us
you
to
very
come
much.
and shed a light on corrections.
Thank you for sharing your time with us, because I'm sure you're both very busy.
I'm at the York County Jail in Alfred. You can reach out to me if you have any questions outside of this meeting. Definitely could come down and coordinate a walkthrough tour of the facility. No commitment to joining corrections. But if you're interested in learning a little bit more, let us know and we can work something.
Especially if you're in a class about corrections, it's nice to be able to take something from theory and actually put it into practical.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being so generous.